Made was spoken. Crescent Chronicles 20. A Curse for Hire by Franetta McMillian. Digital narration performed by Narrator's Custom Voice 1. The first thing I noticed when Magdalene entered the restaurant was that she was missing most of her hair. The last time we'd met, she still had her trademark voluminous locks styled in an elegant updo. Now she was nearly bald. But she was still breathtaking. It's not every day you see an attractive 6-foot-plus woman with flawless midnight brown skin, clad in a body-hugging designer hassuit, ambling your way. Several patrons paused their conversations to stare as she walked past. I stood, waved her over, and watched as her face brightened when she spotted me. "Anthony," she practically squealed with glee, and then rushed to envelop me in a bone-crushing embrace. "So nice to see you." "Nice to see you too," I said. She released me, then gestured toward the small table near the bar where I'd been sitting. "Is this where we're eating?" she thought to me. "No," I replied aloud. "I've reserved this a secure private booth downstairs." "Fancy schmancy," she teased. "I know you're the Bishop of Greater Houston now, but the nights aren't paying you that much." "No," I thought back. "They're not, but the nights aren't paying. I am." "Scared of that," she thought, smiling. "Surely I'm not worth an entire month's salary." "On the contrary," I said aloud. "Ever since you got posted off continent, I hardly ever get to see you in person." "When was the last time?" "Sometime late last year," she replied. "See?" I said. "That's much too long." That's when my assigned server for the night approached us. "Sir," she asked, "is this the rest of your party?" I nodded. She grabbed a tablet. "Then follow me." I retrieved my messenger bag from the floor, and Magdalene and I followed her to an elevator near the rear of the restaurant, just opposite the kitchen. We entered, and the host scanned her key card to take us underground. We descended for what felt like several stories. When we finally reached our floor, and the doors opened, she led us down a long, narrow hallway lined on one side with a series of numbered burnished steel doors. She stopped at door 2, inserted her key card into the reader, and the door promptly hissed open, revealing a cozy, finely appointed dining room with a candlelit table set for 2. She smiled and handed me the tablet. "Your menu, sir. My name is Talia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. You can buzz me with your drink order when you're ready. There's a button under the table." I silently nodded my thanks, and Magdalene and I entered. Of course, Magdalene had to duck. No standard doorway was ever high enough for her. The door hissed shut behind us, and we took our seats. Magdalene scanned the room and asked, "Seriously, how much is all this setting you back?" "Not much," I replied honestly. "The owner owes me a few favors." She laughed. "How very mafia of you," she quipped. "What would you like to drink?" I asked. "Actually, I'm leaning more towards smoke this evening, if you don't mind. Do you see a house blend?" I scanned the tablet. "I do. Did you bring your own smoke kit, or will I have to order one?" "I have my own," Magdalene replied. "Where?" I thought to her. Her his suit was so tight, and the sash wallet she wore looked too small to carry much beyond her ID. She winked, and then unzipped the sash, extracted a small metal tin, and placed it on the table. "Well, okay," I thought, somewhat surprised. "You came prepared." I pressed the button under the table, and Talia immediately responded. "I'd like a glass of your best rosé and a small portion of the house blend for my friend," I said. "My pleasure, sir. That will just be a couple minutes." It took her around 5. Talia rang the doorbell, and I buzzed her in. She poured my wine and left the rest of the bottle on the table. Magdalene's smoke order came elegantly presented on a literal silver platter along with a complimentary smoke kit. Magdalene flashed a sly smile. "See, Anthony," she playfully thought to me. "They have complimentary kits for us private booth elite." "Oh, Magdalene," I thought wearily. "Let it go. Can't I just do something nice for a friend?" She filled the pipe, lit it, took a deep hit, held it for as long as she possibly could, then exhaled. "I was only teasing, Padre. Don't be so uptight." I took a sip of wine and sighed. "So," she asked, "how are you? How's being new Catholic Bishop of Greater Houston?" I yawned for an answer. "That exciting, huh?" Well, I enjoy my work with the parishioners. I like most of the clergy. But the Greater Houston Board is a whole mother story. The barons here are truly obnoxious. I mean, do they have to baron all the time? Can't they ever act like decent human beings? Magdalene took another hit. Is Everett Tainer still chairman? She asked. Yes, but he's the least of my problems. That's surprising, Magdalene noted. I've only met the man once, and he curdled my blood. Actually, Everett Tainer is afraid of me. She arched an eyebrow. Why? Please, do tell. We'll get into that later, I said quickly. Right now, I want to hear about you. You've been radio silent for months. Where exactly have the Knights posted you? And what the hell happened to your hair? Well, if you must know, she lazily replied after another hit, I've been seasteading. I've been assigned to Percy Michaels. Well, that certainly explained the lack of hair. Percy Michaels was a baron who'd made his fortune dealing in arms and arcane finance, though he was rumored to have been born somewhere in upper Midwest. Some 30 years ago, he decided to renounce his homeland and land altogether to found his own nation at sea in international waters, where he and his selected few could live life as they saw fit. Percy always seemed destined for riches. He was prodigy-level intelligent, movie star attractive, and incredibly smooth of tongue. He could charm the pants off even the most cynical of misanthropes. He made utter gibberish sound mystical and profound. By the time he'd reached his 30s, he'd amassed himself a mountain of credits, as well as a slew of groupies who glommed onto his obtuse philosophy of libertarian debauchery with cultish devotion. When Mitchell eventually grew tired of irksome regulations and the borings, he announced plans for Procopia at Sea, a sovereign citizen's paradise. He had no shortage of applicants to be citizens of his new nation. He had strict standards. You had to be beautiful, brilliant, and delightfully weird. Finalists in the application process had to endure an interview with the big man himself. Mitchell was also an ardent believer in what he termed radical androgyny, and thought the most evolved and desirable people transcended the rigid binary of gender. Many in his fandom shaved their heads and wore unisex clothing. The vast majority of his fandom were white, and Mitchell definitely preferred it that way, which is why it struck me as odd that the Knights would post Magdalene in Procopia. Why, pray tell, would the Knights post you there? I asked. You're not exactly Mitchell's type. Usually that's true, Magdalene concurred. But I've found he does have a begrudging respect for anyone who can cream his ass multiple times playing Go. I just laughed. Magdalene had a mind like a steel trap. It was hardly surprising she could go toe-to-toe with the likes of Percy Mitchell. So what was your mission? Mitchell has been surreptitiously manipulating global currency exchange rates to his advantage for decades. Let's just say I planted a little bug in his system. What does Mitchell look like these days? I asked. Rumor has it he's had a ton of work done. Magdalene flashed the devilish grin. Oh, I'd estimate he's about 40% recycled plastic, 40% silicon and titanium, and 20% flesh and bone. He looks pickled. I made a face. Gross. Then I leisurely scrolled through the menu. What would you like to eat? I asked. What are you having? Magdalene asked back. Spicy peanut noodles. Are theirs as good as yours? I shrugged. Probably not, but at least here I don't have to do the dishes. She laughed. I see you're as modest about your cooking as ever. I'll have what you're having. I buzzed Talia again. 2 orders of the spicy peanut noodles, please. Yes, sir, she replied. That will be about 20 minutes. I waited until we'd stuffed ourselves silly before I rummaged through my messenger bag and extracted the silver courier's envelope I'd received earlier that day. Magdalene's bottomless brown eyes widened as soon as they caught a glimpse of the envelope's reflective edge. A courier's envelope was almost never a good omen. I tossed it onto the table without comment. What's this, Anthony? Magdalene asked, intrigued. Are you or the parish in trouble? You tell me, I cryptically replied. Open it. She flashed me a quizzical look, then did as I requested. Oh my, she gasped as she examined the elegant formal invitation now in her hands. Seems like you've made the big time. Have you ever been invited to one of Lillian Ruby's private seminars? I asked. Magdalene shook her head. No, can't say that I've had the honor. Do you have any idea why I might have been invited? She read through the invitation again, and then asked, "What's multiplanial illness?" I explained. It's when an entity or entities from beyond the veil mix with a biological or environmental pathogen to produce an illness that's both biological and spiritual in nature, and you can't cure the whole without curing both parts. I once speculated about the possibility of something similar in an email I wrote to you when I was posted in Liberty City. Magdalene nodded with recognition. Yes, I remember. Carmeletta, your ghost charming boss at the bookstore, had you consult with her on a case at a local hospital. But how would Lillian Ruby even know about that? Now I admit I might have discussed your theory about potential illnesses on multiple planes with him, but I was careful not to mention details of the case or your name. Well, Dr. Ruby might not have knowledge about the Liberty City case, but he certainly knows something about a similar case I worked on in Greater Houston. Magdalene cocked an eyebrow. What case in Greater Houston? You never told me about that. Well, there's a very good reason why I haven't mentioned it until now. I'm legally bound not to. The client made me and my partner sign an NDA. I paused to take a breath. That case is the reason why Everett Tainer is afraid of me. Now Magdalene was on the edge of her seat. Why? What happened? I whispered, "Do you remember the Destination Hill disaster?" She nodded enthusiastically. Oh yes, who could forget it? There was a gas leak and explosion at Tainer's plant in Destination Hill, resulting in nearly 100 casualties. The victims' families sued Tainer for negligence and wrongful death and actually won. But Tainer predictably threatened appeal and refused to pay. That is, until something happened, and he suddenly changed his tune. I filled in the missing info. What happened was that nearly 100 hungry ghosts of the Destination Hill dead piggybacked onto his daughter's already aggressive leukemia and threatened to kill her. That is, until my partner Maureen offered to bear the ghost's punishment in the child's stead. Maureen? Asked Magdalene. That's the young woman you discovered in the hospital in Liberty City? The one who was clinically dead for several minutes and awoke with sightly gifts galore? I grinned like the proud mentor I was. I simply couldn't help it when I thought of Maureen. She was the discovery that made my time at large in Liberty City worth it. Yep, she's the one. Magdalene gasped. And you're telling me she bore the wrath of nearly 100 hungry ghosts? By herself? I nodded. Yep. And she lived to talk about it? Yes. Maureen's very much alive, dosed charming in the Crescent. Damn, Magdalene swore. She's strong. That she is. She's also invited to the seminar, although she's not exactly thrilled about it because her boss is making her go. Okay, Magdalene said. It's obvious Lillian Ruby knows something about what went down in Greater Houston, but the Destination Hill disaster and settlement were ages ago. Why would the case interest him now? That's precisely what I hope you'd tell me. I figured you might have some inside wisdom, seeing as the Knights had you shadowing Dr. Ruby for a few years. Magdalene filled her pipe with the last remnants of smoke and lit it. Yeah, she wistfully mused while taking a hit. They did. And out of all the barons I've shadowed, Lillian's the only one who earned my respect. It was obvious Magdalene still missed him terribly. Lillian Ruby was only supposed to be her mark, but she thought of him as a friend. So, I needled, any pearls of wisdom? Frankly, I'm not sure what inspires Lillian to host one of these seminars. Sometimes you can be extremely nonlinear in his thinking. My educated guess is that similar cases have since presented themselves, and Lillian wants to facilitate a meeting of the minds around the topic. But how would he have found out about the Tainer case? I certainly haven't spoken about it, and neither has Maureen. Magdalene chuckled. Well, Anthony, there's no big mystery there. Everett and Lillian are barons, and sometimes barons talk. Of course, Occam's razor. I was making the world way more complicated than it needed to be. Suddenly Magdalene got a sheepish look on her face, and actually squirmed in her seat. Which was strange. Magdalene never got squirmy about anything. Did she know more than what she'd already told me? Actually, she confessed in a low whisper. Turns out I may know a little something about your Greater Houston case, too. Now don't get me wrong. I didn't know until now you and Maureen were involved, and I certainly didn't realize it was Tainer's daughter who was cursed. But I may be familiar with the general outlines of the case. I felt a pang of anxiety. Before she joined the Knights, Magdalene had led a colorful, though morally slippery life in the Florida swamps. She sold her considerable coding skills to the highest bidder, and, as a voodoo mambo, cast questionable spells for hire. I didn't falter for her past. Florida was and still is a lawless jungle, and people do what they need to survive. But if Magdalene was still engaging in morally questionable pursuits as a knight, that was something I couldn't ignore. "Did you have anything to do with this curse?" I asked. I prayed her answer would be no. No, but I know who did. And who was it? An old Florida friend, a Hungan who goes by the name Papa Jocko. So, what exactly did this old friend do? Magdalene sighed. Well, as you know, Everett Tainer was initially found to be responsible for the explosion at the plant and was ordered to establish a fund for the victims' families to the tune of $500 million. And Tainer, being the entitled bastard that he is, threatened to appeal the ruling on a technicality. Of course, an appeal would have put the victims' families at an extreme disadvantage. Tainer has nearly limitless resources, and the families did not. They'd crowdfunded the bulk of their legal expenses, and the sympathy of strangers only lasts for so long. They simply couldn't afford for the case to languish in court. At first, Magdalene continued, the families tried to bargain down for a smaller settlement, figuring it was better to get paid something rather than nothing. But Tainer didn't want to pay anything at all. So, one of the victims' families approached Papa Jocko and paid him to curse the Tainers, figuring Tainer might pay up if he or those close to him had to suffer personally. Did this Papa Jocko specifically direct the curse at Tainer's young daughter? I asked. If so, that's something I can't abide. Magdalene winced as if I'd struck her and swallowed hard. No, she shakily replied. He just prayed for Everett Tainer to suffer, and to suffer enough that he would pay those families what they were owed. He left it up to the ancestors to determine how. Jesus, I swore in an undertone. Papa Legba, don't play, quipped Magdalene. Did this Papa Jocko come to you for counsel? I asked, before casting this curse. I'm sorry, Anthony, but by the time Jocko told me about the Tainer curse, the deed was done, and even if it hadn't been done, and I'd had the opportunity to counsel him against it, I doubt he would have listened. What makes you so sure? I asked. Jocko wasn't exactly supportive of my decision to join the Knights. He thought I was selling out. If I had counseled him against the curse, he just would have seen it as more proof that I was losing my edge. Magdalene's grief over her damaged friendship was obvious as she spoke. Her emotion was so intense, it nearly overwhelmed me. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry, Magdalene. Were you and Jocko close? Yeah, she replied softly. We were. Florida wasn't all bad. There was a time when I loved him. Magdalene, I'm so sorry. Silence. Anthony, she began slowly. There's probably something else you should know. Okay, I thought. Now you're scaring me. I attended a ceremony at Jocko's temple. It was just before my posting in the Crescent ended. There's nothing wrong with merely attending a ceremony, she continued. Anthony, it was much more than that. Papa Gede rode me, and through me he gave a prophecy about the Crescent. I have a keen sense that Lillian's seminar invitation is the start of that prophecy being fulfilled. Why? I asked aloud. What did you predict? Nothing less than a revolution, Magdalene stated plainly. One that would involve at least two prominent Crescent citizens, Lillian Ruby and Allison Flowers. She paused briefly, and her eyes got a faraway glazed look. Listen, people, a storm is coming. Hot, wet, and full of thunder. And after the flood, everything will change. Domers and outsiders will face a common enemy. A plague with eyes. The Crescent will have many saviors, one from every generation, from an old man who speaks the language of trees, to a child with skin as pale as ice. A bridge will unite both worlds. She will not fear death because she will know it well. Believe me, people, we will see a golden age. I didn't know how to respond. Magdalene's words barely made sense to me. But then again, I never spent significant time in the Crescent, nor had I been possessed by the ancestors. Did the prophecy feel true? I asked. Yes, Anthony, it definitely felt true. What does this prophecy have to do with me? I don't exactly know. but I sense strongly Lillian Ruby is involved. He's the only old man I know who could even dream of speaking to trees. Plus, I don't think there could be a revolution in the Crescent without him. The old man speaking to trees was the least disturbing image in Magdalene's prophecy. I longed to know more about the plague with eyes, and I told her so. Frankly, I'm not sure about the plague, Magdalene said. I'm not sure if it's a literal plague. She paused thoughtfully. I know all this vagueness is deeply unsettling to you, but you have to realize, when the ancestors choose to speak through you, you don't always understand what they say. Did your old friend Jocko understand? I asked. Perhaps. He's done his best to keep the prophecy alive in the years since. You mentioned Allison Flowers. Wasn't she the Baron's daughter who got booted from Crescent Dome for a couple of years? Yes, she was, Magdalene replied. And for a while before that, she was the outsider's most passionate advocate on Crescent Board. She also had the sight and was crazy strong. I heard she passed away some time ago, I said. Yes, she did. But before she crossed the veil, Allison gave birth to a baby girl. Do you sense Allison's daughter is part of your prophecy? Magdalene loudly exhaled. Yes, unfortunately. My interest was piqued. Why, unfortunately? I mentored Allison for a while, at Lillian Ruby's behest. He'd been Allison's mentor since she first came into her power at the ripe old age of 7. Well, Lillian did the best he could with the limited time he had, but he thought Allison needed more consistent guidance as well as a woman's touch. So Allison would volunteer at the homeless shelter twice a week, and when we got through with shelter business, she'd hang out in my office and we'd talk. And, I prompted, Allison's gift was strong, and, unlike most do-good-dummers, I believe she sincerely wanted to help the outside, simply because it was the just and moral thing to do. But this desire wasn't just rooted in a heartfelt compassion. She also sought revenge, against her father especially, but also against those of his ilk. Allison was one of the few people in the Crescent who stayed in touch with me after I left. But somewhere in there, I decided it was best to break off all contact with her. Why? I asked. Allison went extremely dark, Magdalene replied, into a place I couldn't follow. Well, that sounds ominous, I commented. In her last email, Magdalene elaborated. Allison told me all about how she was going to ferry a group of deep outside practitioners into the outer hinterlands in her shuttle. Together, they would search for haunted objects they could use in a spell to curse the dome. She continued, none of the people going on this expedition were posers, Anthony. If this group seriously sought to ill-wish donors, there was no doubt in my mind they were capable of casting a curse that would do real and lasting damage. And before you ask, yes, I did advise Allison not to participate in that curse. I told her that while the curse might feel good initially, the collateral damage would be far too great. Viciousness, even that which feels well-deserved, never heals. I know sometimes you doubt me, but I do believe in the knight's discipline, and I have no desire to return to my old lawless ways. I squeezed her hand again. I'm thankful for that. The knights need you. She squeezed back, as I need you. Then she raised my hand to her lips and kissed it. I immediately felt the heat rush to my face. Long ago, we'd shared a real kiss once, back when she was a novice and I was her mentor, at the Knight's Cloister in Tennessee. It never went further than that, but that single kiss bound our souls forever. Anthony, don't look so embarrassed. You know how much you mean to me. I do, I thought back. After that brief moment of awkwardness, I checked my phone for the time. It was nearly 11 p.m. Closing time. I put Dr. Ruby's seminar invitation back in the courier's envelope and buzzed Talia to settle accounts. I was careful to make sure Magdalene never saw the final bill, but she probably saw it anyway. We left the restaurant separately, as we usually did when we met in person, so no one in the Knight's brass could claim our friendship was inappropriate. By the time I exited, Magdalene was nearly a block down the road waiting with a crowd of people to cross the street. But that was still close enough for her to send me some final thoughts through the hazy night air. Godspeed, Anthony. Thank you so much for dinner. I pray you don't get disciplined over it. I have a feeling our lives are about to get very interesting.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.